I still remember the day my father died. I was only 10, and it felt as if someone had torn my world apart. My name is Edwidge. Before that terrible day, my life was full of adventure and joy. Every weekend, my father and I would set out for an early morning ride. Our bicycles gleamed in the dawn light as we raced through the park. "Come on, Edwidge, you can do it," he would shout during my track meets, his voice carrying across the entire field. We spent hours training together. He never missed a single one of my sporting events, whether it was soccer practice or a simple neighborhood run. Dad was always there, cheering me on with his bright smile and boundless enthusiasm. But after the funeral, everything changed. My mother, who had always watched our athletic adventures with mild disapproval, suddenly decided to turn me into someone entirely different. "Edwidge, darling, put those sneakers away," she said, her voice tight with disappointment. "I bought you some lovely new ballet flats. Wouldn't you like to try them on?" At first, the changes were gradual. But then, like an avalanche, they became overwhelming. Weekend workouts were replaced by shopping trips for dresses and makeup. Instead of sports gear, my mother started buying me beauty magazines, and every birthday brought yet another pile of cosmetics I never wanted to use. "Sit still," she would command, trying to apply mascara to my restless face. Every young lady must learn these things. But I didn't want to be a young lady. I wanted to run, to feel the wind in my hair, to race against my own best times, just like I had with Dad. The mirrors in our house became my enemies, reflecting the image of the girl my mother wanted me to be, rather than the girl I truly was. It was clear I wasn't the daughter she had hoped for. Every time I chose sneakers over heels or picked up a basketball instead of a makeup brush, I could see it on her face, that mix of disappointment and frustration that made me feel broken. 3 years passed this way. My mother and I were locked in a silent battle over who I was supposed to be. And then she met him. A widower named Casimiro, with a 9-year-old daughter named Wanda. At first, I hoped that having someone new in the house might improve things. Maybe Mom would be happier and stop trying so hard to change me. But Wanda was a nightmare. She was everything I wasn't, perfectly dressed in fancy outfits, obsessed with makeup, and utterly vicious when the adults weren't looking. She waited until Mom and her father were distracted. And then the real horror began. She hid my homework, messed up my room, made snide comments about my boyish clothes. "She's just expressing herself," Mom would say whenever I complained. "She just has a strong personality," Casimiro would add. I sat there, knowing the truth. This wasn't independence. This wasn't a free spirit. This was pure malice, carefully calculated to make my life miserable. And the worst part? Since she was younger than me, there was nothing I could do about it without looking like the bad guy. At first, I tried to keep my distance, but Wanda seemed to enjoy hunting me down. She would sneak up to me with the sweet smile of an innocent child and then whisper something sharp, something cutting, something that ate away at me from the inside. "You act like a boy. No wonder Mom wants to fix you. I wonder, if your dad were alive, would he be disappointed in you too?" Her words struck at my deepest wounds. I was angry. Oh, how angry I was. But if I lashed out, my mother would only shake her head. "Really, Edwidge, is it so hard to get along with a little child?" A little child. That's how they all saw her. Little, sweet, darling Wanda. I didn't know how to fight it. I felt cornered. I felt like I was losing myself. But then, one day, something happened that changed everything. The wedding was small and quick, held in our backyard on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I stood there in an uncomfortable bridesmaid's dress, feeling the fabric dig into my shoulders, watching as my mother beamed at her new husband and his daughter. They moved in the next day, bringing boxes full of pink, frilly things that seemed to take over our house like an invasion. "Mama," Wanda called out in her sweet, syrupy voice, each word hitting me like a slap. "Can you help me with my hair?" And my mother would come running, practically glowing with joy, while I stood in the doorway, invisible. It felt like a performance, a strange, inside-out play where everyone had their perfect role, except me. Wanda was everything my mother had always wanted. She spent hours trying on dresses, experimenting with makeup, asking for fashion advice. She never got dirty, never wanted to play sports, never did anything that wasn't carefully curated. But behind closed doors, Wanda was different. She waited until we were alone, and then she showed her true face. One morning, I woke up late for school because she had sneaked into my room and turned off my alarm. "Oh no, you overslept," she cooed innocently over breakfast, while my mother frowned at me for being irresponsible. From that moment on, things only got worse. She would accidentally spill nail polish on my favorite sports jerseys. She would forget that we had to share the bathroom, leaving me to wash up in the kitchen sink while she took hour-long showers before school. "Mama," I tried to explain one day after finding my homework soaked with water. "She's doing it on purpose." My mother just sighed and exchanged glances with Casimiro. "Girls, you're sisters now. You need to work these things out yourselves." "That's right," Casimiro agreed, patting Wanda on the head. "You two just need to learn to get along." But how could we get along when she was deliberately making my life miserable? She hid my things, messed up my room, then played innocent whenever I got angry. And the worst part? My mother believed her completely. That was when I started spending more time at my grandmother's house. She lived just a few blocks away, and her home became my refuge. There, I didn't have to pretend or fight for attention. I could just be myself. "Are you sure everything's all right at home?" Grandma would ask, her wise eyes seeing more than I wanted to admit. "Yes, I'm fine," would say, not wanting to burden her with the truth. "I just like spending time with you." She would smile and squeeze my hand. And somehow, that simple gesture meant more than all of my mother's forced attempts at closeness. There were no beauty magazines at Grandma's house. No constant criticism of my clothes or behavior. No stepsister, no mind games. There was only love. Simple and real. But even there, I couldn't fully escape. One evening, when I came home from Grandma's, I found my bedroom door open. And Wanda was inside. She was sitting on my bed, holding my old sports journal, the one where I wrote down my best times, my dreams, my plans for future competitions. "Did you really think you could be an athlete?" she sneered, flipping through the pages. I felt the heat rush to my face. "Put that down." She slowly looked up, meeting my gaze with open defiance. "And what if I don't?" Her smile was ice cold. I took a step forward, but then I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Girls?" My mother's voice sounded tired. Wanda changed instantly. Her eyes filled with tears, her lips trembled. I wanted to learn more about what Edwidge loves," she whispered, hiding the journal behind her back. I was trying to get closer to her, and my mother gave me a weary look. "Edwidge, is it really so hard for you to accept your sister?" "She's not my sister." The words escaped before I could stop them, and the moment they did, I knew it was a mistake. Wanda let out a choked sob and ran from the room. "You're being awful," my mother said coldly. "Go to your room." But this was my room. Or at least, it had been once. I closed the door and sat on my bed, clenching my fists. I didn't know how to fight this. The years dragged on until I finally finished high school. I had spent months researching colleges, staying up late perfecting my applications and essays. I applied to several schools, hoping at least one would accept me. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I could barely contain my excitement. 3 colleges offered me a place, but one stood out among the rest. It came with a partial scholarship and was several states away. Perfect. I rehearsed how I would tell my mother and stepfather. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe, finally, they would be proud of me. I chose breakfast. It was usually when everyone was in a good mood. I got into 3 colleges. I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. One of them is offering me a partial scholarship. My mother looked up from her coffee, her expression unreadable. Wanda was 14 now and even more unbearable than before. She paused, mid-bite of her toast. The tuition won't be too expensive with the scholarship, I continued, pulling out the acceptance letter. And the school has an amazing program. Edwidge, my mother interrupted, exchanging a glance with my stepfather. You're an adult now. You need to figure out how to handle your own problems. It felt like a punch to the gut. But, I thought, the words caught in my throat. We don't have the money for your college right now, she said, pressing her lips together. We're saving for your sister's education. Wanda beamed when my mother wasn't looking and, like the grown 14-year-old she was, stuck her tongue out at me. But that wasn't all. Years, I protested, gripping the letter in my hands. And with the scholarship. I said no, Edwidge. My mother's tone was final. She turned to Wanda, dismissing me entirely. Sweetheart, don't forget you have dance rehearsal today. I won't, Mom, Wanda replied in her syrupy voice, emphasizing Mom and shooting me a smug grin. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed my chair back and left the table. My breakfast sat untouched, but no one called after me. No one came to check if I was okay. I could hear my mother and Wanda chatting and laughing as if I didn't even exist. In my room, I let the tears come. Years of hard work, good grades, surviving my stepsister's torment, and this was my reward. They had been saving for her college. But they couldn't spare a single cent for mine. The next morning, I went straight to my grandmother's house. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. What happened, sweetheart? She asked, leading me into her warm, familiar kitchen. The scent of coffee and fresh bread wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. I told her everything, the acceptance letters, the scholarship, my mother's refusal. With each word, I watched my grandmother's expression darken. She gripped her coffee cup tightly. This is ridiculous, she muttered. Sarah has completely forgotten herself. I stared at her, confused. What do you mean? My grandmother took a deep breath. Your mother wasn't always like this. She used to dream of being an artist. She was independent, free-spirited. And now, she lets a man make her decisions for her. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. But what am I supposed to do? She looked me straight in the eye. You're going to that college, Edwidge. I'll help you. She reached across the table and took my hand. Don't worry about college, Edwidge. I'll pay for it. Grandma, no. I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking, I'm offering, she said firmly. I've been saving money my whole life, and what better use for it than my granddaughter's education? Her voice left no room for argument, but even if it had, I knew I wouldn't be able to change her mind. You're going to that college, and you're going to make your father proud. When I came home that evening, my mother was waiting in the living room. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her face. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her eyes burned with anger. So, you ran to Grandma to complain about me? She spat the moment I stepped through the door. Mom, She called me first thing this morning, yelling. She cut me off. Going on about how I neglect you. How she refuses to pay for your college. I clenched my jaw. How dare you make me look bad in front of my own mother? I didn't make you look bad, I said, forcing my voice to stay even. You did that yourself when you chose your stepdaughter over me. My mother's face twisted. Ungrateful. She screamed. After everything I've done for you, you try to turn my own mother against me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I only told her the truth, I whispered. The truth? She let out a bitter laugh. The truth is, you're a spoiled little girl who can't handle not being the center of attention anymore. I clenched my fists. Go to your room. I don't want to see you until morning. I turned and ran upstairs, slamming the door behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it. Through the walls, I could hear Wanda's muffled giggle. She had probably heard everything. And she was enjoying every second of it. But that night, I didn't sleep. I packed important documents. A few photos of my father. Our medals. By dawn, I had everything I needed. I waited until my mother left for her morning yoga class before slipping out of the house. The morning air was crisp and clean, like a fresh start. I didn't look back as I walked toward my grandmother's house. She opened the door before I even had a chance to knock. As if she had been waiting for me. That evening, settled in my grandmother's spare room, I sent my mother a message. I'm staying with Grandma until college starts. Don't worry about me. The message was marked as read almost instantly. But no reply came. Not that day. Not the next. Never. The silence said everything. It told me exactly where I stood in her life now. The weeks leading up to college flew by. At my grandmother's house, I found a job at Sweet Beam Cafe, a small but cozy spot on the corner of the street. I took as many shifts as I could, and every dollar I earned went straight into my savings account. Grandma never asked how I was feeling. She simply supported me. And that was enough. Finally, the day came to leave for college. The train station was quiet. Early in the morning, the streets felt empty, the air cool and fresh. Call me when you arrive, Grandma said, hugging me tightly. I buried my face in her shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume. And remember, she whispered. You can always come home. This was home now. I took one last look around. A part of me still hoped to see my mother at the last moment, to see her appear on the platform, running toward me, late but with regret in her eyes. But the only family I had there was my grandmother. She waved until the train disappeared from view. College turned out to be everything I had hoped for, and more. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. No more walking on eggshells, no more looking over my shoulder, no more molding myself to fit someone else's expectations. I found real friends, people who liked me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. I got a job at the library. Shelving books, helping students find research materials. The quiet atmosphere and steady work helped me feel grounded. And the paycheck meant I didn't have to ask Grandma for money. Though every month, she still sent me a few $100s. No matter how many times I tried to refuse, she insisted. My mother became a ghost in my life. Reduced to rare text messages and obligatory holiday greetings. One day, about halfway through my first year, she sent a message. How are you? I stared at those 3 words for a long time before replying with a simple, great. Studying hard. It was our longest conversation in months. After that, we settled into a routine. Merry Christmas. Happy birthday. Each message felt emptier than the last. Sometimes, I saw pictures of my mother and Wanda on social media, shopping at malls, vacationing at resorts, dining in expensive restaurants. They both smiled like they had everything they could ever want in the world. Maybe they did. Graduation was approaching, and I sent out 2 invitations. One to Grandma, and one to my mother. The second felt like tossing a message in a bottle into the ocean. I knew it would probably never get a response. But something inside me made me send it anyway. When Grandma called, I knew right away something was wrong. I heard it in the way her voice wavered. "Edwidge, sweetheart." I tightened my grip on the phone. "What is it?" I don't feel well enough to travel," she said. "The doctor says I need to rest." My heart sank. After 4 years of hard work, the one person I wanted to see that day wouldn't be able to come. I tried to hide my disappointment, but Grandma knew. "I'm so sorry, darling," she said. "I wanted to be there so badly." That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, searching for a solution. And then it hit me. If Grandma couldn't come to graduation, maybe graduation could come to her. The next morning, I cornered Tyler, my classmate who was always tinkering with tech gadgets. "Hey, do you still have that mini camera that can live stream?" I explained my plan, and his face lit up. "That's genius. We can attach it to your graduation gown, and your grandma can watch everything in real time on her phone." When I called Grandma to tell her about my plan, I could hear the smile in her voice. "You mean I'll be able to see everything as if I were there?" "Everything," I promised. "You'll hear the speeches, see me walk across the stage, everything." She started crying, tears of joy. "You're as smart as your father. He would be so proud of you, Edwidge." Later that day, I gathered my friends to let them know about the live stream. "Just be mindful of what you say, okay?" I asked. "My grandma will be listening." They laughed kindly. "Don't worry," assured me Sarah, my roommate. "We'll be on our best behavior, promise." That evening, standing in front of the mirror, I practiced walking across the stage. I imagined Grandma watching from her bed, probably with tissues at the ready. It wasn't the graduation ceremony I had envisioned when I first started college. But somehow, it was perfect. Graduation day turned out just as I had imagined. The sun was shining. The campus looked beautiful. And I could almost feel Grandma's presence through the tiny camera attached to my gown. Everything was perfect. Until I saw her. My mother. She was sitting in the middle section, wearing a dark blue dress I had never seen before. For a moment, I thought I was just exhausted, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But no. It was definitely her. My hand trembled as I adjusted my graduation cap. I was grateful that Grandma couldn't see my face through the camera. I managed to keep my composure throughout the ceremony. Even as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I could feel her eyes on me. What was she doing here? She never responded to my invitation. She hadn't spoken to me in months, aside from the occasional holiday messages. But now, when my life was finally coming together, she was here. After the ceremony, while my friends took photos and hugged their families, she appeared at my elbow. "Edwidge," she said, touching my arm. "Can we talk in private?" My throat tightened. But I nodded. We stepped away from the crowd to a quiet spot under a large oak tree. For a brief moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe she had finally understood. Maybe she had come to apologize. "I'm proud of you," she said. And for one brief, dazzling moment, I felt like a little girl again, desperate for her approval. But then she continued. "And now that you've graduated and will be working, we need to talk about funding your sister's college." The world tilted. "What?" "Emma just finished high school," Mom said, as if we were discussing the weather. "Her grades aren't as good as yours, so she won't be getting a scholarship. She'll have to pay full tuition." I stared at her. I couldn't process what I had just heard. And what does that have to do with me? Mom's face hardened. Years ago, you told me we couldn't afford to help you because we were saving for her college. Do you remember? I saw her eyes narrow just slightly. We had other expenses. There were problems, Edwidge. You need to stop living in the past and help your family. Your family? I felt anger rising in my chest. The same family that pushed me away. The same sister who made my life hell for years. Don't be dramatic, my mother sighed. You chose to leave. I clenched my jaw. I'm not paying for her college, I said firmly. Edwidge, my mother's voice took on a warning edge. But I had already made my decision. No. After everything she's done to me. No. My mother's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Her fingers dug painfully into my skin. Listen to me, you selfish, ungrateful girl, she hissed, her face inches from mine. You owe it to your sister. If you refuse, don't even think about coming back to the house after graduation. She squeezed my wrist tighter. In fact, I will disown you completely. Is that what you want? My heart pounded wildly. That house belongs to Grandma, I reminded her, forcing my voice to stay steady despite the fury building inside me. My mother's laugh was cold, cruel. Oh, sweetheart, her voice turned mocking, almost sing-song. Mom isn't doing so well. She's been sick for a while now. The gleam in her eyes made my stomach twist. Honestly? She continued, leaning in closer. She's lasted longer than anyone expected. I couldn't breathe. But when she dies, my mother paused, savoring each word, and it won't be long now, everything will belong to me. Her eyes narrowed. I am her only daughter. The casual way she spoke about Grandma's death, the barely concealed anticipation in her voice. I felt sick. This wasn't my mother. Or maybe she had always been this way. I was just finally seeing her for who she really was. I won't help you, I said, yanking my hand free from her grip. Not now. Not ever. I practically ran back to my dorm room. My graduation gown billowed behind me like a banner. The moment I shut the door, my phone rang. It was Grandma. Edwidge, her voice was sharp and clear, with no trace of the illness my mother had spoken of. She had heard everything. My hand flew to the tiny camera still clipped to my gown. In all the chaos, I had completely forgotten about the live stream. Grandma had witnessed the entire ugly scene. I'm sorry you had to hear that, I stammered, sinking onto my bed. I didn't want you to. I need you to pack your things and come home immediately, she cut me off. Can you do that? The trip to Grandma's house took several hours. The entire way, my mother's words replayed in my mind. The way she talked about Grandma's death. How could she be so cold toward her own mother? When I arrived, Grandma was sitting in her favorite chair. She looked frail, tired, but the fire in her eyes still burned bright. She pulled me into a tight hug, then sat me down at the kitchen table. I had a very interesting conversation with your mother this morning, Grandma said as she poured tea for both of us. I waited in silence for her to continue. After hearing what she said at your graduation, I called her and told her to move out of my house. I nearly choked on my tea. You what? Grandma's eyes sparkled with a mix of mischief and steel. She was quite shocked, Grandma said. Apparently, she truly believed that my house had somehow become hers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Anne, is she leaving? We'll find out tomorrow morning. The next morning, Grandma and I drove to the house where my mother lived. When we arrived, they were all there. Mom, Casimiro, and Wanda, who had grown taller but still wore the same smug expression I remembered. The moment we stepped inside, my mother barely glanced at me. She didn't even bother to say hello. "Mom," she said, addressing Grandma, deliberately ignoring my presence. "This is all just a misunderstanding." Grandma stared at her in silence. "Edwidge lied to you," Mom went on, forcing a strained smile. "I never said I would throw her out, or anything like that." Grandma sat down in the living room chair, her old, favorite spot, and fixed a steady gaze on my mother. "I heard everything myself, Sarah." Mom tensed. The camera on Edwidge's graduation gown recorded everything. The silence in the room became almost tangible. Every threat, every cruel word. Including your charming remarks about hoping for my death. The color drained from my mother's face. But she recovered quickly, curling her lips into that same fake smile I had known since childhood. "Oh, Mom. You must have misunderstood. We can talk about this later, once everyone calms down." "No, Sarah. There won't be a later." Grandma's voice was calm, but there was a firmness in it that sent a chill down my spine. "Tomorrow morning, I'm taking Edwidge to the notary." My head snapped up. "I'm transferring the house deed to her," Grandma continued, ignoring the stunned faces across from her. "And while we're there, I'll be updating my will to ensure that all my savings go to her as well." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw Wanda's mouth fall open in shock. Casimiro slumped, as if he wanted to disappear. And my mother. My mother exploded. "You manipulative little bitch." She shrieked at me, all pretense of politeness evaporating in an instant. "This was your plan all along, wasn't it? To turn my own mother against me, playing the victim until you got everything you wanted?" She lunged at me, but Grandma stepped between us. "Enough, Sarah." My mother's eyes burned with hatred as she glared at me. "You're both insane," she screamed. My own mother and daughter, conspiring against me. She spun toward Grandma, pointing a trembling finger at her. "And you? You're just a miserable old woman who got fooled by this ungrateful brat." Grandma didn't even blink. 1 hour. Mom froze. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave." What followed was a blurred whirlwind of movement. My mother, Casimiro, and Wanda rushed around the house, throwing things into boxes and suitcases. They made as much noise as possible, slamming cupboard doors, tossing objects into luggage, snapping at each other for taking too long. But Grandma and I just sat in the living room, watching the clock. Exactly 58 minutes later, they were gone. The house felt empty. Clean. Like the air after a storm. That evening, as Grandma and I sat in the kitchen making plans, an idea came to me. "Grandma," I began. "Why don't you move in with me?" She looked at me thoughtfully. "We could rent out your house," I continued. "And I could take care of you." Grandma set her teacup down and slowly nodded. "You know, that's not a bad idea." She smiled, and suddenly, everything felt lighter. After all, this house is bigger. And it would be nice to have some company. So that's exactly what we did. Grandma's house was rented out to a wonderful young family, giving her a stable income on top of her savings. And our new home? We filled it with life. We turned the living room into a cozy shared space where we spent evenings watching old movies and talking about Dad. I learned to cook using Grandma's recipes, and she taught me how to take care of the garden. I got a new job, made new friends. My life was finally mine. Sometimes, I saw my mother and Wanda around town. They always turned away quickly and hurried in the opposite direction. I heard from mutual acquaintances that they had moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. And that Wanda had ended up going to a community college instead of the expensive university she had dreamed of. But honestly, I barely thought about them anymore. My life was full of other things now. my job, my friends, and most importantly, my grandmother. She showed me what true, unconditional love really is. We built our own little family. Just the two of us. And that was more than enough. Every morning, I wake up to the smell of Grandma's coffee and the sound of her humming in the kitchen. Every evening, we sit together in the garden, talking about our day. And every single day, I'm grateful for that twist of fate that made me wear that camera on graduation day. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think of this story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. See you soon.